Welcome, everyone. Please open up your chat and let us know where you're from, what city or country. We're glad you're joining us. And we're expecting people from all over the world. So look forward to seeing where you're from. We have somebody from Milwaukee, Ann Arbor, Castro Valley, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Glad you're here. And Richmond, so back to the East Coast, LA, Evansville, Indiana, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Central Illinois, Cambridge, Maryland, New Orleans, and we have somebody from Egypt, also DC, and Athens, Greece. Welcome, everyone. More from California and Wisconsin, Green Bay, Newark, New Jersey, Rochester, Michigan, Las Vegas, and somebody else from New Orleans, Berlin in Germany, Wisconsin, Wichita Falls in Texas, and Chicago. So welcome, everyone. And I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kim Sawyer. I'm from the Pulitzer Center. I'm so glad you're here for today's Talks at Pulitzer with author Susan Burton, her daughter Antoinette Carter, and Pulitzer Center grantee and Time for Kids editor Jaime Joyce. This session is part of our summer series, Focus on Justice. We believe it is critical, especially at this time in history, to keep issues of justice at the forefront of our reporting and our conversations. Today, we remember all those who suffer from race-based violence, and especially those who were killed this year: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Rayshard Brooks. The Pulitzer Center is committed to addressing injustice in our journalism and education work and in our public engagement, seeking to put an end to racist police brutality and grossly discriminatory government policies and social practices that have been a part of this country since its creation. If you've joined us for earlier Talks at Pulitzer, you know that the Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit journalism and education organization based in Washington, DC. We support 170 reporting projects a year on global and local issues, ranging from conflict and peace building to environment and climate change, migration and human trafficking, science and health issues, and women and girls' education. We've developed a strong university program, bringing journalists onto college campuses to engage with students and awarding reporting fellowships every year to more than 35 students from our university partners. I noticed that a few are here today listening and participating. On the K-12 education front, we reach thousands of students and educators via class visits, online sessions, and teacher professional development workshops. We also stage public and university events and webinars, such as this one, our Focus on Justice series. You can find all the reporting and education resources on our website at pulitzercenter.org. Now, a few logistics before we move on. We'll start with a conversation with Susan Burton and Toni Carter, moderated by Jaime Joyce, and then we'll have time for questions from the audience. You'll see a Q&A icon on your screen. You can begin adding your questions at any time throughout the remarks. Please go ahead and do that. We love questions. There is also a chat icon on your screen. We'd appreciate it if you'd use the chat box for specific technology issues. Note that all attendees are muted, but if you cannot hear us, let us know via the chat box. We want to let you know we are recording this session to post it online for others who could not join us today. And if you would like to tweet, we hope you do, please use the hashtag #JusticeFocus, all one word. Thank you. And a final logistic, please remember to stay online once this session ends to participate in a brief survey. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Susan Burton has spent 15 years in and out of prison. She then founded a New Way of Life Reentry Project to help women rebuild their lives after time in prison. She is the author of Becoming Ms. Burton, From Prison to Recovery to Leading the Fight for Incarcerated Women, a book I highly recommend. Michelle Alexander, in the foreword to Susan's book, calls her the Harriet Tubman of our times. Antoinette Carter, Susan's daughter, endured her mother's drug and alcohol addiction, numerous arrests, and repeated incarceration. Toni found ways to cope with trauma and now speaks on these issues in prisons and in drug treatment facilities. Jaime Joyce is a grantee of the Pulitzer Center who has reported on migrant families from Central America, Rohingya refugee children in Bangladesh, schools for children in a Kenyan refugee camp, and the challenges children face when their parents are incarcerated. She is the executive editor of Time for Kids. Welcome to all three of you, and I will now turn this over to Jaime to moderate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being with us online today. We really appreciate you being here. We've really been looking forward to this conversation. Susan, I want to start with you. I read your book, Becoming Ms. Burton, which I want to make sure everybody on this call reads and shares widely. I was so moved by your story, and I felt like I learned so much about you and about Toni. And so for people who may not be familiar with you and your work, I wonder if you could start by telling us about your background and how you came to start a New Way of Life Reentry Project, and maybe a little bit more about what the project aims to do.
Yes, so I want to thank you, Kim, for having this session and all those that are with us. Jaime, I was born into hardship. I was born into trauma and didn't really have a choice. But I managed to manage the trauma from a little girl. And up until my son, I was holding it down pretty good up until the time my son was killed. He was killed by an LAPD detective, and I could no longer, just hold on. I was shattered, and I just completely lost my way and just tumbled into this depths of addiction and alcoholism, and began to become incarcerated. So, I had scrapes with the law prior, but this just tumbled me off the ledge. And what I know today is that that incident, that tragic event for Toni, she not only lost her little brother, she completely lost her mother that day. I ended up going to prison, and when I cried out for help from the criminal justice system, when I laid out my life for the courts and for the DA and my attorney, they still just put handcuffs on me. And at some point, you just shut the door on feelings, on emotions, and you just robotically go through life. And that's how I went through doing my time. After 6 prison commitments for substance use, I found a place in Santa Monica, out by the beach, a wealthy community in Los Angeles. And out there, I found a whole different world where people's addiction was treated with resources, kindness, compassion, empathy, and support. And I thought, what an idea, uh, you know, and then I began to think, why hadn't this happened for me before? It would have been so easy to support me in my grief, recovering from my grief, and not to use drugs and alcohol to actually medicate my rage and my pain. So that's what prompted me to start a new way of life, which provides reentry services for women, leadership development, reunification services, and a way to support women to find out their meaning and their lives. And I'm so happy and grateful that Toni helps us too, in ways, at a new way of life. And all the women know her, and she tells them sometimes. She comes over and lectures and tells us about how it feels to be a child of an incarcerated parent.
Well, thank you, Susan. That's a perfect segue. Toni, can you say more about that and about your experience and the work you do today?
It's a tough road for a child as well. And there's so much emotion and so much, like my mother says, so much rage and things that you have to hold in, and no real place to place them, because you, as a child, almost become a co-conspirator to the crime or alleged crimes, and you feel like you have no out, and it's really traumatic. It's traumatic to have a parent incarcerated. It's traumatic to be with your parent at the time they're incarcerated. The lack of resources, the lack of processes, and the lack of humanity in the process is very painful for a child.
When you were little, Toni, did any of the adults, like teachers, other adult figures in your life, did they know about your mom's incarceration?
No one knew but my family.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It was not something that I discussed outside of the family, ever.
Right. And I think that's a big issue when we talk about children with incarcerated parents. There's such stigma and shame and secrecy around it. So kids aren't getting necessarily, a lot of the support that they might really need and benefit from. You talked about trauma, and I want to focus on that a little bit, because that was a theme that really runs through Becoming Miss Burton. Susan, you talk about trauma as something that led to your substance abuse. And, it's something that the women who are reentering, and coming into a new way of life reentry project are dealing with. How do you help people cope with this trauma, and how do you help children? How do we help children navigate this world?
So I don't believe that there is any, I guess what you would say, silver bullet for this. There has to be a mixture of ways in which children are supported. What I found with Toni, to help both of our healing processes, is to make space for her to be able to express her feelings and her thoughts around this traumatic event, or what trauma, that she was just innocent, to an innocent bystander, a child, my child.
Mm-hmm.
I found that to be a way in which she can express herself. But earlier on, it might have been great to have, helpful for her to have a place that she could talk about it then, instead of burying it. We know what happens when people bury pain. We know that's not healthy. So it might have been great for her to have had a safe place that she could talk about what she was feeling, what she was experiencing, how it was affecting her, and what it felt like. But I don't believe that there's any real silver bullet for the addressing the children whose parents are incarcerated.
Yeah. And I should say, just going back to the description of this webinar, we have, the exact numbers are about more than 2.7 million children. Approximately 1 out of every 28 kids, right, has a parent who is incarcerated. Kids under 18 in the United States have a parent who's in jail or in prison. So that's a huge number of kids. And one of the things I shared with you both in an earlier call was that, when I was a teacher long ago, I had a child in my class whose grandmother came to me the first day and said, I just want to let you know something. And shared with me that his mom was in prison, and it really gave me some insight into this child. But I think that so many people, I thought it was so brave of her to say that, because so many people just stay silent. It just is something people don't talk about. Yeah.
And Jaime,
yeah.
when you talk about the numbers of children who have a parent incarcerated, when you talk about it by race, the numbers look so much different, so much different. And so I know that for Black people, African Americans, the numbers are starkly higher, double that of white people.
Yeah.
And so it's another area that, that we just have to address. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. It's the statistics are showing it's 1 in 9 African American children who have a parent in jail or in prison. It's a huge number. And if you're thinking about, just imagine a classroom of kids, how many are impacted by this?
Yes.
And I'll say with that, I remember, I'll take you back to an incident that happened to me in 1972. I was 5 years old. And it's my first recollection of being with my mother at the time the police showed up at a location. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to act. But in that instance, when my mother was arrested, when all of the adults in that particular location were arrested, the only persons that I had to turn to were the police. And the way that the police treated me, I'm 53 years old. I've never forgotten it. I will never forget it. And that gave me trust issues of, if I go to school and say something to a teacher, are they going to treat me the way that the police treated me? I think if that particular instance, if I had not known my address and my telephone number, would the police have taken me as seriously as they did? It wasn't until I told them my address and my telephone number and asked them to take me home. Did they really stop to say, this is what we're going to do with this child? But it gave me, being told that the police are there to protect you, it gave me a false sense of protection, a false sense of hope. And so moving forward, I didn't discuss it with anyone outside of the family because I didn't trust anyone outside of the family. There were no, I guess, huge social services available to children at that time. And what I noticed is, as I got older and I got to high school and we started to see the cocaine epidemic erupt in our communities, I started to see that 1 in 9 versus that 1 in 28. And I started to see where my peers had parents that were arrested. And we started, I would foster dialogue or even counsel some of my peers in high school on the ins and the outs, the do's and the don'ts. And we still kept it in a collective community. We never talked to our teachers about it at all because there was, again, that trust factor. Some of the things that are going on today with the police and the Black community, the trust factor has been ruined it was ruined, I say decades ago, maybe even centuries ago. But for me, it was ruined decades ago, and we did not have that outlet. Today, we have a few more outlets, but just looking at that, the trust factor was the biggest issue for me in discussing anything that happened outside of my family.
Have you seen any change around that with, in talking to the women that you work with, the women and children you work with? Is there any change around police protocol during a time of arrest that you're aware of? When children are involved? When minor children are in the household, rather?
I know I did a speech in 2002, exactly 30 years after that incident with the police. And what I told them was that nothing had changed. We're still talking. We're still having the same conversations and the same dialogue. And the children are almost, the piece that's been left out of the equation. In 2020, I think there are a lot more organizations that have put a focus on it, but if the people are forgotten about, it's still, what about the children? And so I think there have been some strides made by, grassroots organizations, but nearly not enough to the level of children that have parents that are incarcerated.
So Jamie, what I see is that they have sort of a specialized team of social workers that are hired under the guise of keeping children safe and from Child Protective Services that are immediately called in now to take the child to some place that is a caregiver that will provide care for the child. And many, many times for us, our children aren't returned to us, are returned to the family. They're taken to some strange place. And I just think that, like for me, I can't get my relative's child from social services because of my criminal history. And many of our community members have criminal records, and it bars us from actually becoming the caregiver of our families, of our relatives if something happens. And it feels like it's akin to separation during the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, when children were sold off in slavery. It feels like same separation under the guise of the criminal justice system, under the guise of keeping children safe, and separating them out of family and out of community. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, I would agree. Being the only person over 18 without a criminal record at one point in time in my family, I spent a lot of time in family courts, caring for relatives. And today, my son, who I eventually adopted, is actually my mother's brother's son, who came into the children's services arena. And my mom was not able to gain custody of him because of her record. And I was asked to step in at that time. But it's not the first time that I've been asked to step in. It's quite a bit. And if you have a situation where your family cannot, pass a criminal background check or pass a fingerprint background check, then the children have to go someplace else. And like my mother said, they're sent away to strangers. And I know children who will say, you know, I'm not going to have any part of that. And then you get into the whole piece of them running away from foster places, or, you know, trying to find, you know, some sense of comfort, which is, it's taken away from them if their family members don't have the ability to take care of them.
Comfort and also connection.
Yes.
You know, connection with family.
So, you know, thinking about comfort and connection, that's one of the things reporting on visits for incarcerated families, for children to be able to visit their parents. That's one of the things I heard a lot in my reporting was comfort and connection and maintaining those bonds. We certainly, I want to turn a little bit and talk about visits. Certainly we can't do those now because of the coronavirus. That's not an option. But there's a lot of barriers in place that keep, you know, that prevent visits. Can you talk about some of that and maybe some of the things we might be able to do to make them visits either an option or, you know, more, you know, a better experience once kids do have the visit?
Yeah, I know that visiting with your children inside of an institution is very hard and awkward and unfriendly. And what the child has to go through on one end, and then also what the parent has to go through makes it difficult, but I believe that it's something that's really necessary if the mother or the father is going to maintain custody and maintain some type of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, Toni, you came to see me a couple of times, and maybe you can talk about what that felt like for you. Yes.
For me, it's a very sterile environment. It's very unwelcoming. I felt like a criminal. I felt criminalized by the entire process of going to visit. It's almost like there's this cast of suspicion when you walk into the visiting area, when you even, you know, you get to the prison itself. I mean, I'm no fool, and I understand that, you know, there are things that are going on, but again, the level of the lack of decency, the lack of dignity, just the way that you're talked to, it's very disheartening. It's very disheartening. It made me very angry. It made me angry as a child. It made me angry as an adolescent, and today it still makes me angry.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and you said you only visited maybe once or twice during that time. Is that right?
Yeah. I did. I got to a point where I said I did not want to subject myself to that. It's, you know, sometimes it can be humiliating. It can be humiliating just watching what someone else is going through. You know, going through a metal detector and having wire in your bra and being told that after you've traveled, you know, 130 miles to come and see someone, to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, that you can't see that person because you have metal wire in your bra, or your shirt is the wrong color. There are some services that happen outside of the prisons to assist people, but the entire process is almost like you're paraded around as someone who's going to be rejected or being rejected. So it's a very humiliating process for visitors.
Sure.
And as a parent and as a person being visited, every time you leave the visiting room, you are stripped naked, and flashlights go all over your body, and you have to do a really degrading type of search, and it's just really humiliating and degrading. And every time, you know, how much ever you want a happy visit, when you leave that visiting room, you are stripped of any joy that you might have encountered during that visit. So yeah, it's hard. But the other part about family visiting and family contact with your children, I'm watching women now come into a new way of life. And the first thing that they're talking about and asking is about their children and reuniting with their children. And Jaime, many times that parent has lost complete parental rights and no longer have any chance of reuniting and having custody with that child because of the fast track adoption that's happening. And I think that there needs to be some sort of national legislation that goes state by state that ensures that women and men who are in custody have the ability to maintain custody or be notified at least of some recourse they might have to maintain custody of their children. Because I mean, you could, I know what it feels like to lose a child, and that's like this other type of death for your relationship with your child. So I believe that that is, it makes a whole industry that is just around children. That we had talked about the prison industrial complex, and as a fallout of that, we've developed this child industrial complex.
Mm-hmm. Toni, did you want to add something to that?
No, I agree. I think about things that have happened in the past, and I was never in the children services as a child, and I'm grateful for that. Regardless to the mistakes that my mother made, she was still my mother, and I still loved her. To be totally separated from her would have been tremendously devastating for me. I did have great family support. To think that, if my family didn't know where I was, or because they didn't have the ability to take custody of me, that I could just be adopted out, it's traumatic to even think about it.
Is there anything that, for people who aren't familiar with this legislation, Susan, could you maybe say a little bit about the sort of details of that and how this works?
Yeah, it's the Safe Child and Families Act. And in that act, they created this fast track adoption process that, especially for smaller children, younger children, that there can be a year and that child is lost to their parent. And it's like, you have to maintain a certain level of contact. But if you're in custody and you're not being informed by the social worker, you can't meet that bar of contact. And if you are able to, even upon release, there's requirements that the court will mandate you to, and the requirements are equivalent to a full-time job. And so we also support the women to meet those requirements because we have reunification services at A New Way of Life. But it's a part of a big package of legislation, the Safe Child and Family Act. And in that legislation, there's all types of pitfalls and holes around family unity, family custody.
We're about 2:35 right now, and I want to make sure we leave a good bit of time for questions. So I want to remind people who are online to type your questions in the Q&A chat box, or they go in the Q&A box, I think, right? Or the chat, I'm not sure. Cam, maybe you can.
They should go in the Q&A box.
Thank you, sorry about that. So make sure to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to questions in about 5 minutes or so. In this short time that we have left, for just this part of the conversation, Susan and Toni, is there anything that you really want people to make sure they leave with today in this conversation? Anything you feel like is really critically important for people to be thinking about today when we're talking about parents and children with incarcerated parents?
So I want to say that we're at a time in this nation where we are reckoning with a lot. Much is being talked about, much is being exposed. And I believe that we all just need to really lean in with an open mind to understand the complexities of what's been developed around within the criminal justice system, and what role it plays in, you know, our country, in our racist country. So I just want people to understand all of the tentacles of it that affects our communities, and this is just one of them.
Yep. Thank you. Toni, do you want to add anything to that?
I would agree. I think understanding the complexities of how there are so many processes that help to divide our families is critical for people to understand exactly what needs to be changed. You have to understand and have the education to know how to change the process and the policies that are in effect and impact communities, largely communities of color.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could open it up to some questions now. I have other questions I'd love to ask, but I would love to hear what people online are what they're curious about.
Sure. Okay, well, we have several questions already, and we'll start with one from Eileen. Often mothers seem to have a vision of what getting out and being reunited with family will be like, and are bitterly disappointed. Can you suggest how we can keep that connection going? This connection that's vital in holding family together.
I believe that both counseling for the mother and counseling for the child is really important, and then joint counseling. There are, you know, these visions are what people imagine their reentry and their reunification is going to be like. And many times the child is angry and hurt and harmed. And I think I can let Antoinette speak to that, because I had those visions too. And it wasn't quite like that.
No, it didn't quite go like that. You know, I was a very conscious child, and so I saw everything that was going on around me. I think that the counseling will be pivotal in adjusting or helping with that reunification process, because there's really no there's no bonding. There's nothing that's happening when you have a parent that is incarcerated in a way and you're a child. I think you have to have some type of contact. And when there's no one there to show you how to write a letter, or no one there to help you express yourself, it becomes, I just have to get over the fact that that person is not here and move on or bottle it up. But I think that the instead of it being so much of a reunification, I think if we continue to have that bond, I think communicating with that parent, if someone were there to assist the child in writing to that parent and pulling some of that stigma off of the child, I think it would be great. I think if I had the opportunity in school for a counselor or a teacher to say, let me help you write a letter to your mother, or let me help you write a letter to your father, let's talk and discuss these things, it would help to bring some of the stigma away for the child, and the child won't be so won't have so much rage and won't be so devastated in trying to have that reunification. It won't be considered so much as a reunification, but a continuation of the relationship, regardless to where the parent is.
And we know it's so hard to even maintain those bonds when a parent is incarcerated. You know, you talked earlier about how the distance alone, many, many hundreds of miles apart, right? Yes. In some cases, the cost of phone calls, maybe, you know, that's a real issue.
The cost of phone calls is absolutely, utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
I know when my brother was killed, it was in 1981. A year after my brother was killed, my mom and all 5 of her brothers were all incarcerated in different parts of the country. My grandmother's phone bill in 1982 was $1,200.
And the bulk of that, you know, that burden often falls on women, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It does.
So,
great question. Yep. Thank you, Kim.
Toni, I think you've already partly answered this question from Jeff Underhill. Maybe others want to chime in. How can school counselors best support children of those in custody?
I think that having that ability to write to a parent, fostering that ability to have a conversation with a parent would help children a lot. If school counselors had that kind of training and had that willingness to help children, because in my day, there weren't a lot of, in my younger days, there weren't a lot of children whose parents went to jail. I think for me, I felt like I was the only one, literally until I got to high school. But I think the counselors could definitely, if they know that this happens or they know that this has existed, to talk to the child about writing to that parent, about, you know, just writing to that parent and telling them how they feel, you know, getting things off of their chest and having the ability to just have that type of dialogue with their parent. I think it would mean a lot.
Okay. And I think that if there were books that were available for children, I know there's some small children books about parents being incarcerated that people have begun to do illustrations, but if there were some literature or books about what children could do, I think would really help also.
For adolescents.
Yeah, for adolescents.
Absolutely. Teenagers, yes, absolutely.
I just want to add that, you know, when we're talking about counselors in schools, many schools, as you know, don't have these. And what we have instead are police officers in schools. So you have a child who's traumatized, might be acting out or having issues. And then the response is not a counselor, but a police officer.
Yeah.
A problem.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
I think we also have to turn to the teachers in schools where there are no counselors. And Jennifer Stroyan asks, as a middle school teacher with students with incarcerated parents, how can I best support my students other than showing empathy and understanding? And I know that all of the advice you have for school counselors probably also applies to middle school teachers as well. But there may be something you want to add, particularly for that level, 5th grade through 8th grade.
I would say that they need to devise a program to develop maybe a specified class to discuss those things, not necessarily with the individual student, but with the students as a whole. You know, maybe in sociology, or just giving the children, helping the children to understand about current events. It was very important to me to know about current events when I was in middle school. And I think when I was there, you know, they talked about different things that I knew how it personally impacted me. And I think having the discussion about what's going on with the prison industrial complex, with people being arrested, I think it would foster dialogue between all children, and you would find the children would learn to have compassion for one another. Because the worst thing for me was a child who had never had a parent arrested kind of trying to tell me how I was supposed to feel about having a parent arrested, and they never experienced it, and they didn't have any type of information or education on the process of it. So I think if the teachers could talk about it and maybe have, put together a class to discuss those types of things without actually putting those individual children in putting them on the spot, I should say, and just having that open dialogue with everyone to discuss what their feelings are about what's going on. I think today, if you walked into a classroom right now and all the kids were back at school, the first question would be from the teacher is, what does everybody think about COVID-19? It's no different. What does everybody think about what's going on in society, what's happening about these percentages, and just telling them the truth and having that type of conversation. I think you'd be more surprised about what kids know and what you think they know.
And I just think, the bottom line is that we need to stop locking up so many darn people. That would make less children who are missing a parent. There's a whole lot of things that we can do in lieu of incarceration and diverting people to different types of resources and supports. So I think we need to go back to say, let's not put so many people into the correctional system.
And so many people are there as a result of nonviolent offenses, right? It's often drug-related offenses.
So many people are there for nonviolent, even people that are there for violent offenses. The way they charge people in our community compared to other communities is much. The charges are much worse, and then the inability for people to make bail and pressured into copping out and say someone shoplifts and they try to run and they get charged with robbery instead of shoplifting, instead of petty theft. And when they get to court, the DA says, okay, if you copped a robbery, you can go home on probation. That's a violent crime. But we see this over and over and over again. So when we talk about violent and nonviolent, we really have to put a different type of lens on to understand that people are overcharged. And I mean, I remember even with domestic violence, that's a violent crime. And people come out being male, being female, they end up with a violent charge that they can get strikes on. So it's complicated. Let's just say it's complicated. But what we do know is that we incarcerate far too many people, and our criminal in our prison and jail budgets have taken away from our healthcare budgets, our school budgets, our social service budgets, and we threw too much good money into that bad place.
So I think you've partially answered this question from Miriam Czar. She wrote, how can we help you advocate for better policies? In this moment of global movement with a focus on systemically racist policies, how can we help amplify your voice? And within the crime justice system, what can we focus on as far as policy shift? I think you've touched on the policy shift, but several people are asking, what can they do to help you advocate?
Well, while she's thinking, let me just say this. When my mother's book came out in 2016, me being a math major, I started to look at the economics of the process. And I wrote some things down to cover with people in my community, friends, executives at work. And here's what I came up with. California has, I believe it's 33 prisons. Since 1980, California has built one university and 22 prisons. The average cost to incarcerate a person in California at that time was roughly $76,000. It cost more to incarcerate one person for 1 year in 2016 than it cost to send your child to Harvard. Let's think about that. Why are my tax dollars being diverted at such a high cost? If these are the people that you say are quote unquote not worthy, people who have been thrown away, why are we spending so much money to do that? Because the budget needs to be flipped. That money that we are spending, imagine if that person made $76,000 as a salary. We have the bulk of teachers who don't even make that money, but that is the cost that you say you spend to incarcerate a person. It's ridiculous. And I think if people educate themselves on the budgets that are out in their states, you know, California's budget for prison in 2016 was $11.4 billion. Wow. That's one state out of 52.
So, you know, we are beginning to put things on the ballot, and the way people show up to vote. We got here through people voting for tough on crime laws and not voting for the way dollars are spent toward the community. And a lot of it came on the back of like fear mongering. So I would say that each and every one of us can be thoughtful and conscious on the way that we're voting and the way that we're talking about investing in people and communities. And, you know, get loud, you know, get vocal about these issues. Don't be silent while things are happening that can cause harm, because that's what happens, is that these laws and policies that are passed and implemented cause harm. So be the squeaky wheel in the room to say, I'm not going to be silent when I see what's happening here. And I think that if we all take a word, have a word, cast a vote toward a more just and good society, that maybe we can turn things around. Maybe we can turn them around.
Susan, I just want to add that that's one of the things that really resonated for me in becoming Miss Burton, was how much you trained people to be activists and to advocate for themselves. So people who know the system intimately, too intimately, can really make that change and help people understand that. That activism is just so powerful.
I'm going to read 2 questions by people working with incarcerated children or in prisons. This is from Kendra Hovey. I'm part of a team launching a pilot program for adolescent children of incarcerated parents, working with incarcerated father, children, and co-parent. What do you want us to most know as we start this program? And then Ren Dobson asks, I teach in the local jail and I'm always looking for ways to get my students to keep communication with their children. One thing I've done is given them children's books to read over the phone to their kids. What are other things I can do to support the incarcerated parents to strengthen and support relationships with their children? I think you've both already answered these questions, but I just wanted to know if there's something else you want to add about, if you were going to start a program, what is the most important thing someone should do or know?
So I think that someone telling me that that this wasn't all my fault, and allowing me to have compassion for myself started my process. So whether it's the child or the parent, finding a way to let them know that the worst thing that they did or that happened to them didn't define them, that there was beyond, that beyond. I think that was the turning point for me, is someone let me know that it wasn't my fault, because I thought it was all my fault. Even the molestation as a 6-year-old little girl, I thought it was my fault. I thought something was wrong with me. And so I think that's a starting place for people to begin to heal.
And you carried that into adulthood, right? This is something that was with you for so long. If we can sort of cut that off sooner.
I carried it for 40 years. For 40 years, I never let anyone know that the crazy man was harming me. And you all can read about it in the book, Becoming Miss Burton.
Seriously, it's such a powerful book. I highly recommend it, as I know Kim does too. And to learn more about the program and about the experiences, it's really incredible.
Toni,
is questions from people, yeah.
As a child, what would you say? Did you feel like it was your fault?
No, I was different. I never felt like it was my fault, but I felt like, why me? I felt if I could get all A's, or I could have a perfect attendance, or be the child that did the I have a dream speech, would this all go away? So my guilt was shuttled differently. It wasn't that I felt I was guilty, but I felt, why was this happening to me? So it still manifested. It just manifested a little bit differently for me.
Toni, I know we're about to wrap up, but I just want to add something for the teachers that are on the line, because you said that you poured yourself into your schoolwork. You were that straight A kid.
Yes.
Your teachers probably they didn't think of you. They thought of you as having sort of like, you're a perfect student. You're a model student. They had no idea. You're not the picture of a child who has an incarcerated parent. So I think there's, it's really important.
No one had a clue until probably high school. No, the perfect child, straight A's.
Yep. So it's not just the kid who's having trouble in our classrooms, who's the kid who, might have an issue. It's a big issue. It affects so many kids. Yeah. Kim, I know we have about 2 minutes left. Susan or Toni, is there anything you want to add before we wrap up this session?
Yeah, again, I want to thank the Pulitzer Center for having this conversation. And I had dreamed about being in DC with my daughter at the conference, but we're here and it's good. And I want to let Toni know that I love you so much, and you're so articulate, and I'm so happy to be here with you, even on Zoom. This is a great thing for us.
Well, it's been my honor to be with the two of you today, that's for sure.
Oh, thank you very much for everything.
And thank you, Jaime and Susan and Toni. And I do hope we will all meet in Washington very soon for a live conference.
Yes.
That will be great, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for sharing today. And thanks to our audience for your interest, your participation, and your excellent questions. I also want to thank my colleagues at the Pulitzer Center, especially Holly Peipenberg, who produced this session. The Pulitzer Center's reporting and education outreach on mass incarceration and related justice issues is supported by the Art for Justice Fund and other donors. The Art for Justice Fund was created by Agnes Gund in partnership with the Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Please stay with us just for a few more minutes. We will have a brief survey that will pop up to officially end the session. We do appreciate your joining us, and for those who are able, please remember we're a nonprofit journalism organization, and so we depend on donor support. Our next session in our Focus on Justice series is set for Tuesday, June 23rd, 1 week from now at 2 p.m. This will be a conversation with playwright Sarah Shord and Radessa Jones, co-artistic director of the performance company Cultural Odyssey. The topic, healing work of theater in the context of incarceration and the efforts of incarcerated people to be seen. Please check over our event listings where you will see other sessions related to justice, as well as webinars for students and educators. Join us and feel free to share these events with your friends and colleagues. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks.